Hey guys, here is the new version of Chapter 7, The Early Republic. It does have a lot of slides, but don't let that bother you. It is going to be kind of short and sweet. Again, do not write everything word for word, just the main parts. Aim for 3 a slide. So let's begin. In the 1800 election, Federalists are going to have some hardships. The Alien and Sedition Act is really going to upset people to the point where they didn't want to elect Federalists anymore. The whole threat of war with France is always going to be on everybody's mind. And we're going to prepare, even though we don't want to go to war, we are going to prepare for war with France, even though we don't have a lot of money. So we are going to face a lot of debt because we're building ships and we're trying to train soldiers. The Federalists concentrated on Jefferson himself, so he is going to fall to rumors because when you hate your country, who do you blame? The president. So they're going to spread nasty rumors that he fathered numerous mixed children by his slave women. It wasn't a rumor, it was true. And that he had long intimacy with Sally Hemings. In fact, he had several children with her. A liberal in religion, he supported separation of church and state. Now, he was liberal. He did separate church and state as the Constitution requires us to, but he did believe in religion. Here you can see the picture of George Washington with Thomas Jefferson. I don't know why that picture's there, to be honest. Jefferson is going to win by a majority of 73 electoral votes. New York is going to totally support Jefferson, mostly because of Burr's intensive activity. So it's not so much that they liked Jefferson, they just didn't like Burr. Most of his strength was, of course, in the South and the West because he was an agrarian. He was pro-farming, pro-agriculture, and that's where the majority of the people were, thanks to the 3/5 clause of the 3/5 compromise of the Constitution. Now his victory is going to be dampened by unexpected deadlock. So even though he won, we still don't have the 12th Amendment. So first place president, second place vice. Well, the two candidates were tied. And, when John Adams ran, he was third. So he's not even a contender. Under the Constitution, the only people that could break the tie is the House of Representatives, and they were deadlocked and deadlocked. Now, the House was controlled by Federalists. Jefferson and Hamilton, they were Democratic Republicans. So it was like, who do I vote for? They're both the other party. The lesser of two evils. Jefferson is going to win because Hamilton is going to write a letter, and I am going to put that on Google Classroom for y'all to read. He writes a letter in which he says that he knows where Jefferson stands. He may not have agreed with him, but he knew where he stood. He knew what his beliefs were. He didn't know anything about Burr. For all we knew, he was bankrupt, and he was possibly going to try to use the presidency to make money. And because he was a Federalist, and because the House was controlled by Federalists, they listened to him. A lot of them didn't vote, so the tie was broken, and Jefferson is going to win the presidency. It's sometimes referred to as the Revolution of 1800, but it was an actual revolution. What it means is it was a peaceful transfer of power between the Federalists in government and the Democratic Republicans. Remarkable achievement considering, and Americans are going to take pride in vigor of experiment. You don't have to write that down. And look, when you get a chance, watch this drunk history video. So Inauguration Day prior to the 20th Amendment was March 4th. So he is going to be inaugurated on March 4th, 1801 in the swampy village of Washington, D.C. If you all recall, the compromise was struck in order to pay off all state debts. The capital had to be in the South. They chose a place off the Potomac in between Virginia and Maryland, Washington, D.C. He did not go in a horse-drawn coach like others did. He actually walked to the White House from, his boarding house. And it was a classic statement of democratic principles. Of course, I'm speaking of his inaugural address. He was very frugal. It's going to be super different from Washington and John Adams, who were wealthy. I'm not saying Jefferson wasn't wealthy. He just isn't going to be as formal. Everybody's going to sit pell-mell at dinners. You're not going to be sat based on rank. You're going to just sit wherever you want, and it's like an equal table, so to speak. He started the president of sending messages to Congress to be read by a clerk. Jefferson, in practice, is going to reverse many principles that he had championed. So I don't know if we're back in the classroom by the time we go over this chapter, but I have a meme on my wall, and it says, believes in strict construction of the Constitution, purchases Louisiana. So he is going to compromise his beliefs while president, as most politicians do. Jefferson's eviction of Federalists marked first party overturn in American history. He is going to dismiss few public servants for political reasons. And patronage, of course, we are going to really focus on this with our seventh president, Andrew Jackson. Hungry Jeffersonians watched Federalist appointees continue in office. So they assumed that once Jefferson became president, he was going to get rid of everybody and put Democratic Republicans. But if they were doing a really good job, he kept them there. And the people were like, make sure you watch this video. He did do several things to undo the damage caused by President Adams. He pardoned these martyrs that were convicted under the Sedition Act. He enacted new naturalization acts, which reduced the requirement to apply for citizenship back to 5 years. And he had Congress repeal the excise tax because it hurt farmers. And who was his base? Farmers. They loved him. Everybody loved him. Albert Gallatin proved to be an able Secretary of the Treasury. He agreed with Jefferson that the national debt was a bane rather than a blessing, where Alexander Hamilton said, oh, it's good we have debt. Never is debt a good thing. They reduced debt while balancing the budget. So Hamilton did start the country off in the right direction, and then they tweaked it. They didn't do anything about the funding. They didn't do any of the stuff that was put in place after the Revolutionary War. They did not attack Hamilton's Bank of the United States. They did not repeal the minor tariffs because we needed to get money. We had to have a tariff in place, just not that whiskey tax. In future years, they rechartered a larger bank. Jefferson's Revolution of 1800 proved to America and to the world that just because two different parties exist and one lost power and the other one gained it, doesn't mean it has to be a catastrophe. Now, the Judiciary Act of 1801 is going to be significant. This is going to be one of the last laws passed by the Federalists. Now, remember, you had an election of 1800, and the Democratic Republicans took power everywhere. The presidency, the House, and the Senate. Well, the ones that were still in power, they did what we call lame duck actions. You know, you're on your way out in a few months. Let's do as much as we can before we actually leave. So the Judiciary Act of 1801 is going to create 16 federal judgeships. Federal judges are there for life. And who do you think Adams, a Federalist, is going to appoint? Federalists. So yes, Democrats may take over the House and Senate and the presidency, but the for-life judges are Federalists. There's a lot of bitter resentment for this. New Congress is going to quickly repeal the Judiciary Act of 1801. Not today. Now, midnight judges are going to present Marshall with this huge opportunity. So here's a little background. This guy here pictured is John Marshall. He used to be the Secretary of State. Now, you don't have to write this part down. He was Secretary of State under John Adams, but John Adams wanted him on the Supreme Court because he was a Federalist. So he is going to go from the Secretary of State to the Supreme Court. There's now no more Secretary of State. Now, when he started appointing all of these federal judgeships, they had to be approved by the Secretary of State, but there's no Secretary of State. The new Secretary of State is going to have to deliver the papers. Well, you have all of these judgeships. You know, you don't get the job unless the papers are delivered. There's no Secretary of State. So when Jefferson becomes president, the new Secretary of State is James Madison. And he is going to ask Jefferson, hey, do I deliver all these letters? And Jefferson's, no, are you crazy? Well, he didn't say that, but he said, no, they're Federalists. We're Republicans. We don't want those to be delivered. We want to put Democratic Republicans there. Well, one of the people, okay, this is where you could write stuff down. William Marbury was appointed as a Justice of the Peace of Washington, D.C. by Adams. He learned his commission was not going to be delivered, therefore he could not be the Justice of the Peace. He is going to sue James Madison. The audacity to sue James Madison. Am I right? He is going to sue James Madison, and he is going to say the Supreme Court has the power to force him deliver the papers. So Marbury versus Madison is going to it is going to be about a judgeship, but the outcome of it is going to be one of the biggest landmark Supreme Court cases in American history. And then you could watch the video in a bit. It pretty well explains it. Now, Marshall is going to promote the principle of judicial review. So he invented it, and we have it to this day. The Supreme Court is the ultimate rule, the ultimate decision. There's nothing higher than a Supreme Court ruling except another Supreme Court ruling or an amendment. But we've only had 27 amendments, in fact, 17 since the Bill of Rights. It's very difficult to amend the Constitution. Jefferson urged impeachment of Justice Samuel Chase. People know that if you impeach one justice, then you could impeach them all, and it's setting a very deadly precedent. So the Senate is not going to convict or remove him. He's going to be found not guilty, and it is going to establish the precedent of judicial independence. Okay. Now, early on, and I will have an activity on Marbury versus Madison, but watch the videos. Jefferson is going to reduce the military. So if you recall the differences between the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, the Democratic Republicans wanted small military. So while Adams made it huge because of the quasi-war with France, Jefferson is going to say, we don't need that much of a military, let's reduce it. North African pirates in the Barbary states that are pictured here in green are going to start plundering and blackmailing all of our ships that are going into the Mediterranean Sea. So technically Jefferson, he reduced the Navy, the Army. He did not want to go to war with the pirates, but you can't just let them do that, So between 1801 and 1805, we're going to have the Tripolitan War because of the Tripoli pirates. He's going to send an infantry army to the shores of Tripoli. There's going to be 4 years of on-again, off-again fighting. They succeeded in extorting Treaty of Peace in 1805, bargain price of $60,000. This was to get our hostages back. And he also advocated the construction of a small coastal craft, about 200 tiny gunboats built. You weren't saying that in the beginning of your presidency, were you? They're boats with guns on them. Gunboats. Have you seen the History of Japan video? You should totally stop what you're doing and do it now. Okay, now we're going to talk about Louisiana for a bit. In 1800, France is going to sign a super secret treaty with Spain. So if you remember, after the French and Indian War, Spain got all of Louisiana. They had to give it to them. So Spain is going to give it back to France, I should say. Napoleon is in charge, and some historians say, well, Spain didn't want to be, in the crosshairs of Napoleon taking over Europe. So this was kind of like a peace offering. So Jefferson wants that piece of land because if Spain didn't have it anymore, that means Pinckney's treaty was no longer valid and we didn't have access to Louisiana anymore, or my second favorite city, New Orleans. So Jefferson is going to send James Monroe to Paris with Robert Livingston to try to negotiate. They were told, buy New Orleans, but try not to spend more than $10 million. And Napoleon is going to realize that he has his hands so busy with Europe that he doesn't have time to deal with an empire in the New World. So he is going to say, you know what, go ahead. We'll go ahead and give it to you. Now, also at the same time, there's going to be a massive slave revolt in Haiti led by Toussaint Louverture. And they are going to successfully win their independence from France through revolution. So the Haitian Revolution is going to totally be crushed eventually. Yellow fever is going to kill just almost hundreds of thousands of French troops. Napoleon doesn't want any, he wants to focus on Haiti and Europe. So he is going to agree to sell Louisiana to the United States. So on April 30th, 1803, treaties are going to be signed ceding Louisiana to the United States for $15 million. It is going to double the size of the United States. That is probably one of the biggest outcomes of it. And two Jeffersons are going to wrestle with each other because he was a strict constructionist, meaning if it's not in the Constitution, we can't do it. Did the Constitution say what we could buy land from other countries? No, it didn't. But he's going to submit it to the Senate anyway because the Senate has to approve all treaties per the Constitution. It was approved, and we got 828,000 square miles at 3 cents an acre. And if you look at the map, all of that in green. It did secure the western half of the richest river valley in the entire world, and it did establish a precedent for future expansion. So, you really think we're going to stop after Louisiana? We're not. People are going to start wondering, well, if we're expanding and getting involved, didn't Washington tell us not to do that? Shouldn't we listen to him? He was kind of a good president. No? Okay. So Jefferson is going to send Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Lewis was his personal secretary. William Clark was an Army officer, and they're going to explore the northern part of the Louisiana Territory. They left in 1804. It took 2.5 years, and they were basically sent to explore the land, see what native tribes lived there, and see what plants and animals were there. And they kept a journal that is used as a guidebook to this day. It's not on the PowerPoint for some reason, but they did use a Shoshone Indian woman by the name of Sacagawea with her French husband. She actually gave birth on the journey, strapped that baby in a papoose on her back and continued. Sacagawea was amazing. They also wanted to see if what river was it? One of the rivers reached the Pacific Ocean, and it did. I forgot. The map isn't here. But do watch that video. Zebulon Pike is going to trek to the headwaters of the Mississippi River. He's going to explore the southern part of the Louisiana Territory, and they are going to name a peak after him, Pike's Peak. The Louisiana Purchase did expand our fortunes. In the short-term situation, we just had tons and tons of land. But how are we going to be able to govern a massive amount of land, especially when we have no access to really far-off parts? Now, Aaron Burr, Jefferson's first-term vice president, is going to make things worse. He's going to join with Federalists to plot secession of the New England states and New York. Hamilton's going to find out, and Hamilton's going to do what he does best. He's going to foil the conspiracy, and Burr's going to be angry. He's going to challenge him to a duel. And if y'all have seen Hamilton, you know from history that allegedly Hamilton's gun, he aimed up. Some people say he fired, but the bullet got stuck. I honestly don't know the truth, but Hamilton did die, and Burr is never going to be trusted ever again. He's actually going to be tried for treason in a few slides. In the next slide, I should say. So Burr's then going to turn to the Mississippi West. So if we can't secede with New York and the New England states, let's look on the other side. So he's going to strike a deal with General James Wilkinson, governor of Louisiana. He was a secret agent for Spain, and his army was supposed to meet Burr at Natchez. Wilkinson heard that Jefferson knew about the plot, so he's going to flee to New Orleans and isn't going to partake in it. Burr's going to be arrested and tried for treason. But Marshall, the new Chief Supreme Court Justice, was a strict interpretationist of the interpreter of the Constitution, and he is going to believe that you can only be removed for high crimes and misdemeanors, and treason, you have to have actual proof. I shouldn't have said removed. I'm thinking of impeachment. Required proof of acts. So he never did anything that was treasonous. He just planned it. And because of that, he is going to be acquitted, and he's going to flee to Europe where he dies. Jefferson is going to win re-election in 1804. He got 162 electoral votes to only 14 from his opponent. Napoleon's going to provoke new war with Britain, and this is going to affect us. In 1805, there's going to be the Battle of Trafalgar. Lord Nelson is going to smash the French and Spanish fleets, and this is going to basically be like the Spanish Armada all over again. Britain is going to be the naval power of the world for the next 100 years. The Battle of Austerlitz in Australia, Napoleon's going to crush Austrian and Russian armies and ensure his mastery on land. Now, in 1806, London is going to issue orders in council. Remember, London's at war. They closed ports under French control to foreign shipping, including American ports, unless you stopped at the British port first. So Napoleon is going to order a seizure of all ships that are sailing, including American. So England and France are at war with each other. We're neutral in the middle, not involved. they're going to stop shipping to us, and that's going to hurt us. There was no way we could choose one side or the other. It's like your two best friends are fighting, and they're like, whose side are you on? Don't choose a side, bro. Don't choose a side. They'll never forget. Impressment is also going to hurt the Americans. This is going to be when they kidnap American sailors and force them to serve on their ships. 6,000 American citizens were impressed by Britain from 1808 to 1811. Now, the Chesapeake affair is going to make things worse. A British frigate is going to stop a U.S. frigate, the Chesapeake, 10 miles off the coast of Virginia. The British are going to say, yeah, you have 4 British deserters on your ship. You need to give them to us. And America's like, no, we're not. Britain's going to fire 3 devastating broadsides at close range. 3 Americans are going to be killed. 18 are going to be wounded. And the 4 deserters were taken anyway. So the Chesapeake is going to go back to fort in Virginia. Now, Britain's clearly wrong. And the London Foreign Office is going to say, hey, we shouldn't have done that. You know, we killed 3 of your men. We injured 18. My bad. But America was furious because they just apologized. That's it. We wanted justice. And Jefferson was like, well, we could easily go to war for 13 killed and 18 injured. We don't really have the means for it. Let's see how far we could get without going to war. So honor would not permit submission to Britain and French mistreatment, but we were not ready for war. So warring nations needed the United States for raw materials. So Jefferson said, if they want to buy our stuff, all of our stuff that we provide to them, they'll leave us alone. So we need to hit them where it hurts. And what's the bottom line? Money. So he thought if he cut off selling, cut off the money, then they would listen to us. So he issued the Embargo Act in 1807. This forbade export of all goods from the United States, whether in American or foreign ships. And Jefferson actually believed this would cause England and France to leave us alone. The economy was devastated. It barely affected England and France. We had to smuggle, especially along the Canadian border, because all the ports were being watched. On March 1st, 1809, 3 days before Jefferson retired, Congress repealed the embargo. 3 days, that's how much it was hated. The Non-Intercourse Act formally opened trade with all nations except Britain and France. So the Embargo Act was repealed and replaced with the Non-Intercourse Act. Now, the embargo did fail because Jefferson underestimated British determination. We thought they would want our stuff. We miscalculated the unpopularity of the Embargo Act. He thought Americans would be okay losing money. But no, what's the bottom line? Money. The upside to this is the Yankees, because we couldn't sell, meaning we couldn't buy. We are going to start opening up our factories and making things for ourselves. So we no longer have to buy from England and France and Spain. We could make it ourselves and save a ton of money. Jefferson actually improved factories. So if you remember from lecture, Jefferson was agrarian farmer and Hamilton was industrial factories. Under Jefferson's presidency, America became an industrial nation, made it more so, even more than Hamilton ever could. Look at this guy. James Madison, 4th president. Madison won the presidency. He took oath of office on March 4th, 1809, and the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809 would expire in 1810. So Congress is going to completely get rid of the embargo and replace it with Macon's Bill number 2. If either France or England repealed the restrictions, we would restore the embargo against the non-repealing nation. So if England lifts their restrictions on us, we're only going to sell with England, not France. If France lifts their restrictions, we're only going to sell to France, not England. It was a bluff. It was a gamble. And do you think it worked? It didn't work. The French implied their restrictions would be repealed. So we are like, okay, well then we'll go ahead and side with France. Madison didn't trust Napoleon, but he did it anyway. Threat of exclusive U.S. trade with France should leave the British to lift their restrictions. So if you tell the world we're going to lift the restrictions with France, maybe England would do it first. Gave gave Britain 3 months to revoke orders, and the British didn't. So Madison gambled, and he lost. When 12th Congress met in late 1811, older submission men replaced by young hotheads, many of them from the South and the West. Now, they were going to be called, oh, that's an interesting cartoon, bleeding from his eyeballs. They were called war hawks, and they are going to advocate war with England. They want to go to war. They also wanted to destroy the renewed Indian threat because Britain was instigating the Indians again. Now, there's two Shawnee brothers, Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa, and they were known to non-Indians as the Prophet. Now, they started to resist the white man moving onto their land, which was American land, but nonetheless, we just got new land from the Louisiana Territory. They began to form a confederacy of all the tribes west of the Mississippi. Frontiersmen and their war hawk spokesmen became convinced that the British in Canada were instigating them and financing them. In 1811, future President William Henry Harrison is going to gather an army and is going to try to take down Tecumseh. Now, Tecumseh wasn't there, but the Prophet was. His army is going to go with a small force of Shawnees, and they are going to have their settlement burned. The Battle of Tippecanoe is going to make Harrison a national hero. That's going to launch him into the presidency in 1840. They discredited the Prophet. They drove Tecumseh into an alliance with the British. During America's war with Britain, Tecumseh is going to fight for England until he's killed in 1813 at the Battle of the Thames. And with his death, all of the Indian Confederacy plans that he had went down with him. Now, pushed by these war hawks and upset by these constant native attacks, Madison is going to say, you know what? We have to do something about war. And remember, Jefferson started building these ships. So by the time Madison was president, we're going to have that. Congress approved the request of war in June. Republicans supported the war. Federalists from the North were against it. And we'll get to that in a bit. So we are going to go to war with England. So the War of 1812, our army was very badly trained. They weren't disciplined. They were scattered everywhere. They had to be supplemented by state militias. And some of the generals were around during the American Revolution. Like, I'm no math genius, but like 30 years later. Canada is going to be an important battleground area because the British forces were weakest there. So our best bet would win Canada. America's offensive strategy was not really well thought out. We did not capture Montreal, and instead we led a three-pronged invasion. Invading forces from Detroit, Niagara, and Lake Champlain were defeated after we crossed the Canadian border, so we didn't know what we were doing. On the other hand, the British and the Canadians had this great energy. They quickly captured the American fort Michilimackinac. You try it now. That sounded better. Americans look for success on water. So if we're going to lose on land, then let me try water. American Navy did do much better on the water than on land. Our ships were better than the British because we had literally just built them. And the USS Constitution had thicker sides, heavier firepower, and larger crews. And then there's the USS Constitution. Control of the Great Lakes is going to be vital. Energetic American officer Oliver Hazard Perry is going to build a fleet there. His victory on Lake Erie is going to infuse new life into the Americans. And Redcoats are going to be forced from Detroit and Fort Malden, and they are going to be defeated at the Battle of the Thames. Even though the American Revolution ended, we still had British troops in our land, and this was where we finally got rid of them. Despite the successes, we were far from invading Canada. Thousands of Redcoat veterans began to pour into Canada. 10,000 troops, British prepared for war against New York along Lake River route. Invaders were forced to bring supplies over Lake Champlain. Now, let me tell you, at the time, Napoleon Bonaparte is wreaking havoc and England is taking care of him. That is why they are not focusing on us. As soon as they defeat Napoleon, they're going to turn their full attention on us. And then, watch out. American fleet commanded by Thomas MacDonough is going to challenge the British. They're going to be desperate. They're going to fight near the battle. They're going to fight near Plattsburgh on September 11th, 1814. And this victory is really going to send shockwaves. The British army was forced to retreat. MacDonough saved Upper New York from conquest. And I want to say, the worst is yet to come. Washington, D.C. is going to be burned down. And I have to tell you, you have to watch this Dolly Madison drunk history video. It is super hilarious, okay? A second British force of 4,000 is going to land at the Chesapeake Bay. They're going to march towards Washington. 6,000 militiamen are going to be at Bladensburg. They're going to set fire to buildings, including the White House and the Capitol building. In fact, when they repaint and renovate the White House, it used to be called the Presidential Manor because they repainted it and it was white. That's why they called it the White House. Americans in Baltimore did hold firm. British hammered Fort McHenry, but was unable to take the city. Francis Scott Key, who was a lawyer defending one of them, there's also a drunk history video on that, but you'll have to Google it. Francis Scott Key was in there. He overheard some British plans, so they had to keep him there so that he wouldn't ruin their plans, which was all in vain because the Americans won anyway. A third British assault aimed at New Orleans did menace the entire Mississippi Valley. Andrew Jackson, future president, is going to lead there. Jackson had 7,000 soldiers. 8,000 British soldiers are going to make horrible mistakes. They're going to suffer the most devastating defeat of the entire war here. They lost over 2,000 and wounded in about half an hour. That's worded funny. News of the victory at Battle of New Orleans was super great. Jackson's going to become a huge war hero. At the same time, all of this is going on. The United States is in Belgium, in Ghent, trying to sign a peace treaty. So the war ended 2 weeks before the Battle of New Orleans, but the Battle of New Orleans is going to just make America like this huge patriotic country. But the war ended. Tsar Alexander I of Russia. Why is he in here? Blah, blah, blah. No, you don't really need to know that. Americans rejected these terms. Okay, so the Congress of Vienna is going to be met. The Treaty of Ghent is going to be signed on Christmas Eve, 1814, and it ends in an armistice. We're going to go back to the way things were before the war. And it was a draw, no winner, but America was really the winner because England left us alone and we became so patriotic. I'm not even kidding. The downside is, remember those New Englanders that were against the war? They were secretly meeting in Hartford, Connecticut to talk about things. Amongst things are, secession. So Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island are going to send delegations. New Hampshire and Vermont are going to send partial. 26 men are going to meet in secret for 3 weeks, from December 15th to January 5th, to discuss their complaints. Only a few of them actually wanted to secede. Among things they wanted a one-term presidency, no more 2 terms. They wanted to get rid of the 3/5 compromise. They demanded financial assistance from Washington to make up for the lost trade they got from the war. They wanted a constitutional amendment requiring 2/3 vote in Congress before an embargo could be imposed. They were really seriously upset about the money, you guys. They wanted to get rid of the 3/5 clause. They wanted to limit presidential terms to just a single term, and they wanted to get rid of 2 successive presidents from the same state. So if you look at the first 5 presidents, 4 of them are from Virginia. The only one not from Virginia was John Adams. So George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, even future James Monroe, they're all from Virginia. Anyway, 3 envoys carried demands to Washington. They arrived just as news of the New Orleans victory arrived. So they couldn't. If they had just waited a little bit, none of this would have come out. But the fact that they presented it right when news of the New Orleans victory happened, it's going to devastate the Federalist Party. They're never going to be in power again. And this is going to be a slap in the face because we had this huge victory at the Battle of New Orleans, and you want to secede? You want to get rid of our great country? People were upset. So the War of 1812 is going to be considered the second war for independence. In the war, 6,000 Americans were killed or wounded. It had no impact on the globe, but other nations are going to start respecting us because we took on England not once, but twice. Thanks to Admiral Perry and Macdonough, we were successful. Most people called it the Second War of American Independence because we defeated the enemy again. Sectionalism is going to be dealt a black eye. Federalists were the most defeated, I should say. But then you had William Henry Harrison and Andrew Jackson emerge as heroes and are going to become future presidents. The natives are going to be abandoned by the British, and this is going to be the very beginning of the absolute end of the natives in America. And because we had to deal with the embargo, we now have a huge surge of industry, and that's going to lead to the Second Industrial Revolution. Canadian patriotism did increase by war. Many did feel betrayed by the Treaty of Ghent. They were aggrieved by failure to secure Indian buffer state or even mastery of the Great Lakes. And the Rush-Bagot Agreement in 1817 is going to limit naval armament. So we're not going to have British American ships on the Great Lakes. The forts are later going to be removed. So there's no real actual border between the United States and Canada when it comes to military. United States and Canada came to share the world's longest unfortified boundary, 5,527 miles. Now, the most impressive product of the war is going to be heightened patriotism or nationalism. We may not have fought as one nation, but we emerged as one nation. Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, they're going to be prominent American writers that are really going to flourish during this time. The Bank of the United States is going to be rechartered. We'll get into that later. New national capital is going to rise in Washington. The Army is going to expand to 10,000. That is a lot of people. Navy is going to have more victories when we defeat more pirates in Africa. The American system. So nationalism did manifest itself in manufacturing. Let me just pause real quick because I think this might be parts of a new chapter. I'll be right back. Okay, we're actually going to stop here because these next 10 slides are going to be for the next chapter. So I'll see you then. Thanks for watching and bye.